Wrath of Angels. Chapter 4, Scene 2, The Desecrated Shrines. On the Shrine-World Veyla, Northern Reliquary Quarter, 2 hours after planetfall, Month 6, Year 260, the 41st millennium. Veyla stretched beneath them like a corpse left out in weather that had forgotten how to be kind. From the air, the city resembled ribs torn from a chest. Shrine spires snapped and listing, their bells scattered in streets like jawbones prized from skulls. Wind ran the boulevards and stirred ash into rivers that curled around monuments and drowned them without ceremony. The domes of cathedra, once colored glass that taught saints to burn, lay shattered into white drifts that looked like frost until trodden on. When walked upon, they sang. Not long, not beautifully, but they sang. Thunderhawks broke cloud with wings of flame. Their shadows swung across plazas and made the statues look as if they moved. Processions of pilgrimage carts lay overturned and half swallowed, votive lanterns embedded like emerald insects in the dust. A gate arch stood intact, a perfect ring of stone, the relief at its crown scraped bare. Gouges were all that remained of a saint's face. A single hand, too stubborn to be erased, reached upward from the vandalism like a plant pushing through gravel. Mortals felt the weight of it first. In the hold of one lander, Lisa pressed her cheek to the viewing slit. Her breath fogged the glass and then burned it clear. She recognized a basilica where she had paid a coin to light a green candle in a past life that had worn her face. The basilica was a charcoal ribcage now. Wind had piled its pews across the nave, as if arranging firewood. The altar's cloth hung in rags that looked like tongues. "Don't," Rel said, catching the line of her stare. "Don't remember it." He made it a command because that was the only way to make it survivable. Jask stood behind them, whispering numbers, as if they were the only fence left between him and whatever ran here. He counted collapsed shrines. He made it to 9, and then a thunderhawk rolled, and the number fell out of his mouth. He started again at 1. Numbers were merciful that way. They forgave failure by being themselves. Bays opened, ramps screamed. Heat hit faces first, a breath like an oven door. The Ravenwing went out like quarrels from a drawn bow. Bikes leapt into smoke and ash and vanished as if welcome. Kaelin's fist came up and the cohort flexed around the gesture like a muscle obeying its nerve. His signals were scripture that made sense even in a poisoned tongue. 2 fingers slicing down for split and shadow. A flat palm held out for cut and strike. A circle for collapse and crush. The riders read him, not the street. They moved as one body wearing many engines. Celian's voice slid into their ears, cold as a blade pressed to a wrist. Arches unstable. Boulevards choke in 30 paces. Sense of smoke is toxin, filtered. Ambush signs, medium confidence. Markers in hair rope. Watch lintels. Orath revved as if laughter were a chemical he could aerosolize. Kaelin's glance cut the rev in half. The bike purred like an obedient animal, almost ashamed of its own hunger. Tyrion took a side street without being told. It admitted him like a confession booth. Shadows softened to welcome him. He rode through the dust without drawing a line on it. He disappeared before his tires finished spinning. Veyna lay prone on shattered glass at the top of a broken stair and let the city climb into his scope. He breathed out, and everything that wasn't the field of view went away. A column of cultists paraded into existence, slow as a procession, but with no destination, voices hoarse on words they had broken and glued back incorrectly. Banners stitched from sunk cloth dragged on the ground. Censers hung on chains from cracked hands. Smoke ran black out of them, as if the metal itself wept tar. A man whose skull had been shaved into a facsimile of a lion's muzzle led them. On the banner he wore as a robe, a wing had been wired down until it bent wrong. Veyla took him in the throat. The hymn stuttered. He took the second man through the eye, and the song fell down 3 notes and died into screaming. Orath fell among them like a smiling catastrophe. His blade learned the names of 5 men in as many heartbeats. The censer smoke surged and made faces in the air and tried to bite. Tyrion slid out from behind a ruined reliquary and opened a throat without disturbing the soot on the wall beside it. Celion whispered, "Collapse inward." Rims of ash spun out from the bike's arcs as they cut the procession into pieces that were no longer a procession, only a spill. The Emerald Vow advanced in the manner of a wall that had decided to walk. Boots sank to the ankle in dust that did not care who they were. Malvin's banner burned green over them, with a color that felt illegal in that place. Varikan's voice was iron cast to shape. "Hold ranks. Remember your vow." Garen sharpened Joreth with words, until the youth bled discipline. Ephra's named saints with each step, voice climbing. When he reached a name he could not bring himself to say in this place, his lips made smoke, and then Garen cuffed him, and his mouth remembered how to be a weapon. Torvain set his weapon beside the banner's haft, and carved fire lines through a cloister arch where figures moved in a way that warned the eye they were wrong. They passed a reliquary garden. Trees that had once been carved into saints had been uprooted and replanted upside down so that their roots could wave for help. Niches that had held relics had been stuffed with ash until the dust overflowed and ran down the walls like water, like grief. Books lay in long rows under a broken portico, the pages copied in a hand so careful it had become mechanical. But the text was wrong, and had been wrong for so long, the wrongness had become tradition. A marble saint stared with empty sockets, stuffed full of hair, twisted into rope, and varnished into gloss. Ephra's gagged. Varikan tapped him once on the pauldron with 2 knuckles as if to say, "Breathe later." The first organized resistance met them at a cloister whose columns were carved into the hands of praying giants. The corrupted PDF had dug in amid the benches and confessionals and sacrament tables, their flak redaubed with eagles turned inside out. They held shields cobbled out of reliquary casings and swung candelabra sharpened into pikes. Their chant was almost a hymn. Almost. It made the tongue itch to hear it. "Break their left," Varikan said. Garen ran point. Torvain's heavy fire tore open the reliquary shields and spun brass into knives. Joreth saw an eagle and hesitated as if the symbol should mean refuge. Then Garen's voice found his ear and broke the symbol into metal again. Malvin advanced the banner 3 measured steps, and the green scythed through smoke like a verdict delivered by a patient god. The cloister turned into a stove for a minute. When the fire finished its lesson, the only sounds were hot things cooling, and the echo of a senior's voice closing down the urge to vomit in a junior. The Oathbound of the Sanctum moved with the kind of slowness that terrifies, because it is not lazy, it is inevitable. They chose a spire whose doors had already sagged inward under the weight of what had happened. Dominial went first, Mortalis resting across his shoulders like a memory that ate its own tail. The nave smelled like wax that had learnt teeth. Zephanes laughed when a reliquary grazed his pauldron, and the skull inside shattered as if the bone were relieved. Lutherian struck the flagstones with the edge of his shield as he walked, not breaking them so much as asking them questions. If they lied, he struck them again. Abriath spoke numbers that were not coordinates, and yet made doors out of walls when he pointed. Ramiel's voice ran a litany backwards, and the frescoes flaked like dead skin, as if understanding the trick and refusing to be read by any demon within earshot. Desecration in the spire had become ecology. Scrolls wrapped columns like constrictors and flexed when men passed, script tightening as if to feel a pulse. The pulpit throbbed. Wax dripped from a bank of candles and cooled into teeth. And when the teeth fell, they clattered and tried to bite and failed and lay still. The altar cloth exhaled and pulled itself taut across a table that had never wanted to move. Stone sweated salt water that had learned to pretend to be blood. In the side chapels, mortal survivors crouched. Lips split, eyes evacuated, hands raw from clapping to the wrong beat too long. One man lifted his head when the Deathwing came through, and somehow found a word in the debris of his mouth. "Angels?" he asked. The question hung like a moth circling a torch. Garen's bolt took the back of his skull off before anyone had time to lie with good intentions. Varican's voice came down the vox like a lid closing. "We do not answer catechisms." The squad moved as if the event were a punctuation mark and not a sentence. The city mocked itself. Ropes braided from hair hung across streets like festival bunting for a feast no one survived. Ash had learned to crouch in niches shaped for saints and had become wolves with teeth made of glass. Walls wore defiled heraldry, wings wired to cower, lions shaved into humility and then painted laughing. Everything that could be reversed had been. Everything that could be miscopied had been copied wrong enough to become truth to those who needed the lie to hurt. Celian's voice came colder than before, and that meant the news was worse. Ambush pattern. 3 lanes, staggered, false retreat. Priors in choir alcoves, children in front rank, confirmed. Kalen lifted 2 fingers, turned his palm, and the street obeyed a geometry that only he and Celian could see. Veyna crawled a broken arcade and found height the street had forgotten. Orath rolled his bike forward a handspan at a time, as if he might lure a snake. Tyrion vanished between 2 doorways, whose gap was narrower than his knee. They came out of the broken choir stalls, out of what had been a baptismal font, out of a book cupboard. Men in robes made of banners, faces repainted in ash with smiles stitched on. Women with nails driven through their palms so they could not drop the censers. Children with mouths wired shut to keep the liturgy in. One boy swung his censer as if singing, eyes huge as doors. The censer was a bomb with a holy smell. He walked into the Ravenwing lane as if he were about to hug his father. Veyna took the link of chain above the censer and cut it. The bomb fell. The boy followed it with his eyes. He would have followed it with his hands if the wire had not held them back. Orath swerved past him and took a man in the same motion, blades screaming. The censer detonated. The boy went upwards in a flower of brass and meat. Ephraim saw it from the plaza mouth. The prayer in his throat curdled into something that had a saint's name in it, and then did not. He spoke the name anyway, and ended the child's friend with a bolt while the word still stung. Celian's collapse did not sound like a command at all, only inevitability pronounced. The Ravenwing folded inward like a trap sprung in the correct direction. Veyna's next shots cut the choir arch supports and brought a rain of wooden hymnals down across a lane that would have been used to flank. Tyrion appeared behind a man whose robe still smelled of sweet oil and put a knife through the place where the man's voice started. Kalen took a spear to his bike's cowl and ignored it, as if a fly had mistaken itself for weather. Orath laughed once, a bark, not joy, only refusal to stop living, and turned the laugh into another kill. The Emerald Vow's line advanced over ground that tried to trip it. Malvern planted the banner hard enough to make the ash sigh. Garen dragged Jorahth's attention away from a statue whose eyes wept tar and back to the angle of fire. Torvain put a line of flame across a balcony where robed shapes had begun to gather, and the shapes ran like wax. Varicon did not raise his voice. His orders cut through noise by simply being true when they met the world. Mortals came off the landers with crates and coils and their hearts in strange places. Lisa stumbled past a saint's niche, where a wolf of ash watched with a patience that was not animal at all. Rel steered her by the elbow, as if she were a cart he did not want to upset. Yas clenched the parchment the Watcher had given him, and refused to open it because the words inside would be real once he looked. He carried reality in his cheek like a coin he could not spend. A Watcher walked between the newly dead, as if directing traffic. It stopped by a boy without a face and set a strip of parchment over what remained. The screaming in the plaza broke off in the space of a single breath, not because the act had healed anything, but because punctuation is a kind of mercy. The Oathbound climbed the steps of the spire's ambo. The pulpit's heartbeat stuttered at their approach. Dominiel laid Mortalis across it, as a butcher lays down his knife when asked the price. The wood smoked and screamed quietly. Zephanis swatted a relic skull away with the back of his hand, and the thing went rattling into a stall and laughed when it landed. Lutherian took a step into a side aisle and tested the floor until it decided to be solid. Abriath drew a line in the air with one finger, and in the next moment a barricade that had not been there was suddenly obvious to everyone. Ramiel's reversed litany picked up tempo until the scrolls that wrapped the columns began to slough off like snakeskin. Outside, bells that had been silenced for weeks rang because the wind wanted them to, and not because hands did. The notes were wrong, and therefore unbearable. The angels' vox nets carried too much breathing. Men remembered to close their mouths. Defiled heraldry marked the street ahead. First Legion iconography wired into positions that made meaning bleed. A lion shaved until its skin looked like a grin. Wings stitched down to a back that had never deserved them. Paint used like a weapon. Varicon saw it and refused it entry into his memory. Kalen saw it and rode through it. Dominiel saw it and promised something with the way he set his feet. They pressed deeper into the city, and the city pressed back. Wind drove ash up like surf. Statues wept tar. Choir stalls with no one in them produced a low sound full of teeth. In the nave, a woman dressed in a robe made of stitched-together scapulars stood with a book upside down and read aloud in a voice that had been freshly learned. When Ramiel spoke his prayer backward, her book turned to ash and her mouth shut of its own accord, as if a hand had found the hinge and preferred it closed. The Ravenwing cut 3 more mock processions apart and found bombs in the censer every time. Ephraim took 2 names clean and a third that stuck like grit under his tongue. Garen stepped between Jorath and a child who swung a bell full of nails, as if it were a toy, and took the swing on his vambrace, because there was no other place for it to go. He killed the child, because there was no other place for that to go either. He did not look at Jorath when he did it, because Jorath would have to live with it, and should not see his own face reflected in the act. Celion's map of the city was a silence written down. 3 more lanes, angles wrong, geometry warps where heat is highest. His calm was a raft. Kalen stood on it and turned it into a blade. Vaynar's scope cut poems into ash about trajectories that ended in heads. Tyrion wrote an answer in blood no one would read. At the plaza's heart, the angels raised their banner, and the wind did what wind always does. Tried to take it. Malvern did not allow that. The cloth snapped and shouted green into a day that had forgotten colour. Ash swirled around the haft and made a spiral like a column. The spiral tried to say something and could not. Silence, which had become law, made it dumb. And still, beneath everything, the wrong song played. miscopied scripture, deliberately mistaken rites, bells rung by weather. The Legion's discipline ground forward against it, a millstone chewing grain that had no business being bred. When the last of the corrupted PDF ran, they ran toward a cathedral whose door had learned to breathe. The angels followed, and the city that had once been a map of worship became a maze of insults, in which even the insults had learned to pray. The watchers kept pace without walking. Parchments appeared where eyes had been, and where eyes would never be again. Lisa carried a crate she could no longer feel, and stepped around a saint's hand, pushing up through ash. Rel was done speaking. Jask finally unfolded the parchment with fingers that did not want to, and read 3 words that changed the shape of his mouth. He did not say them aloud. He put the paper back in his cheek like a coin he intended never to spend. The angels pressed deeper into a city that had become its own heresy, and silence followed them like a prayer that could not be answered, and therefore would be obeyed. This has been Wrath of Angels, Chapter 4, Scene 2, The Desecrated Shrines. Chapter 4, Scene 3 follows.